Formula One regulations are an endless talking point, and everybody has their own opinions about Formula One, what it should and what it shouldn't be. I'm joined by a man who has been in Formula One on and off since 1973 and who isn't afraid of expressing a controversial opinion or two, Gary Anderson. And Gary's going to run through 5 things he thinks are wrong with F1 that really could be improved. Now first, Gary, we're going to talk about the amount of time cars spend going slowly.
Yeah, well, it's come with the hybrid engine as well. Part of the going slowly is you do one fast lap, you use up your battery pack, you have to go slow to charge it back up again before you can do another one. So that's one thing. The cars aren't too slow doing that, but they are slower. So there's none of this. You can't get this routine. If you're a spectator at the track, you don't get this routine of the car driving laps fast. And you can see that whenever they put higher fuel loads in, they just can't go as quick as 7 or 8 seconds off the pace just because they're not using the battery pack in the same way. But the one for me is this tyre warming up, and even after a fast lap, coming back to the pits, it's too slow. It's ridiculous, to be honest. You know, there's people actually stopping on the track, waiting to get a gap. And I think they have to put in some type of a percentage of the speed you travelled at, or your car has travelled at, in your fastest lap so far that weekend. Very easy to do. The dashboard's a very intelligent piece of kit. So basically, if you on a certain part of the track, if you've been travelling at 160 miles an hour, the minimum you're able to do would be 140 or something. Just go for a percentage all the way around the lap. That means at least if you've got a fast car catching a slow car, the speed difference is not quite so big. Because one day, very soon, somebody's going to have a big accident with a car that's more or less stationary. Now we go to all this safety stuff of barriers and runoff areas and gravel traps and stuff, and then you've got this 750 kilogram Formula One car sitting there, stopped, and somebody coming up blind. So I think that's got to be eliminated because I think it's too much.
Well, number 2, it wouldn't be a discussion about Formula One's rules and regulations and racing without talking about tyres. So what don't you like about the tyres? What could be better?
I think the tyres are okay. From my point of view, they don't fall away as much as they should. We should be forced into more pit stops. And this thing of you've got 3 different compounds, it'd be very simple to say you've got to use all 3 of them at some point in time during the race. So you get 2 pit stops at least in every race. But the tyres themselves are no different from the tyres. You go back to 1973, we had problems with tyres blistering, we had problems with tyres wearing out. You always have problems with these 4 bits of black rubber that connect the racing car to the ground. And especially if the balance of the car isn't right. Back in 1991, when I designed my first F1 car for Jordan, Hungary as an example, we had Goodyear tyres, qualifying tyres, and you couldn't do a full lap on them. If you went through turn 1 and 2 quick, by the time you got to turn 13 and 14, the last 2 corners, they were just hanging off the rims. So the black and round bits have never been any different. They've always been critical to looking after them. And you've had to do it. Slightly different characteristics. We get a lot of talk about these overheating with the car sliding and not being hot enough and all that sort of stuff. But if you look at the way the teams treat the tyres, with these slow laps that we just talked about, and then one fast lap and then a slow lap and then a fast lap, there's sort of too much emphasis put into it. You need to have the car where you can drive the car. And I think the tyres are actually better than everybody, because everybody's trying to find an excuse. And it's very easy to blame the tyre, and I don't think it's that bad.
Next up, we have the constant development. Every race, the big teams bring many bits and pieces, sometimes with little tiny changes. So how do you suggest perhaps Formula One could address that and perhaps change the way that development is done?
Well, my way would be to try to save costs as well as would be to homologate certain parts. So you arrive in Australia with the car you want to arrive in Australia with, and you supply the FIA with a set of drawings, or the FIA supplies you with an FIA sticker, and certain parts of the car, i.e. the underfloor, the front wing, the rear wing, side pods. So the major components, the big bits, that need a lot of research, they have to stay on that car. If it's a 20 race season, let's say, 21 races it was this year, they have to stay on the car for 5 races. So Australia right through to Spain, end of Spain, that's what you got your package. So you've got to look at your efficiency and your adjustability of all these parts to suit those 5 races and not just one. But what that does is it allows a team to research their new parts and arrive at race 6 with a new package on the car that they've had time in the wind tunnel to research properly, make sure it's working. Because so much of this stuff gets researched, huge amounts of money spent, arrives at the track, it doesn't work, and they put it in the bin. And that, you've got to eliminate that somehow. And that's the only way I can see it doing it. It would save money, for sure. It would mean that you'd have a package of the car that you needed to make sure would function correctly. And because, let's say, 21 races, 5 races, you have one wild card. So if a team arrives in Australia and suddenly, the car isn't as competitive as they thought it should have been, they can pitch in with a setup of bits that they can put on the car if they want to. But then that starts the 5 race program thing again. So you have got one wild card in there to recover from. But you've got to stop all this stuff, because the big teams just arrive at race meetings with more and more bits. A front wing, to get a front wing onto a car, a new design of front wing, is something like £250,000, £300,000 with moulds and tooling. Just to replace the one you've got on there is about £120,000. That's mad. That's not the research time. That's just the stuff you have to make. Once you press the button and say, I want to make a new front wing, that's just the stuff you have to make to get it onto the car. So the costs are ridiculous.
Well, and connected to that is the wider landscape of how much teams are spending. There is cost capping planned to come in, but is it aggressive enough? What can you do to try and make Formula One a bit more sustainable for teams, so we can do what we want to see them doing in terms of development, but not going overboard?
Yeah, I think the problem with Formula One is that the spread from the front teams, Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull, I suppose, to the back teams, i.e. Williams, and at the minute it's the lesser teams with lesser budgets, is so big. To round it up, you're talking less than 100 million for the lower teams to compete a season, to 350 million. So where do you pitch your cost cap at? Pitch it at 250 million? Great. Yeah, what's it going to do for this guy down here? He still has to spend his 100 million, and he's struggling to find that. So the cost cap has to work in a different way, I think. It's got to reduce the costs of the cars as far as the money spent for this guy. So they've got to look at the smaller team and make sure that they're helping the parts that he has to spend on. These guys here will always spend what they've got. The big budgets, they'll always spend that extra bit. But if you take that 100 million and you take a top team's 350 million, the difference is the development. That 250 million is focused on having more people, more facilities, more bits, more everything, because that 100 million, they can still go racing with that. They don't suffer that way. That's enough for them to do a season's racing. But it's the gap between the two that you're trying to close down. And if you can look after this guy here and drag the big teams right back down. But to say that the cost cap's going to be 250 million, what does it do for anybody? Plus driver, plus top-end management, plus. The cost cap will just be another thing that will disappear into the undergrowth. The way they're talking about it. It can't be policed, it can't be done, and it's only going to reduce the budget for the big guy.
And the fifth and final item is one that's somewhat controversial, but Gary, it's the fact that teams don't build cars that run well in traffic. Now, they've tried to tackle this with the regulations, and some good research has been done for 2021 to try and improve that, but you've got a more outlandish solution that actually makes more sense perhaps than people think at first glance.
Well, first of all, I'll wait to 2021 to see if any of the research does anything, because going through from 2009, when the changes were first made,
taking working group regs,
to now to 2008 and 19 with the front wing regulation changes, I have not seen a step in improvement. All of that was about making cars work better in traffic. I have not seen that change visibly. We've had some good racing, but for different reasons, not because the cars can work better in traffic. So my thing is about reverse grids, championship grids, because if you had at least one race of a weekend, I'm talking about, you could either have this race we know now on a Sunday, and it would just be reverse championship grid, so Lewis Hamilton would be on the back of the grid and Robert Kubica would be sitting on pole. If you have that, then the teams are forced to design cars that will work in traffic. At the moment, the regulations are written, and the best solution for a team is to build as fast a car as you can on its own in clean air, because that can put you in pole position. If you can get in pole position on a Saturday, why would somebody pass you on a Sunday? Why would somebody drive up to you in a slower car and pass you, other than the fact you've got a problem? So you've got to reverse that, I think, and put the emphasis on the teams to design cars that will work in traffic. Now, I know it's a complete change to the format of a weekend, but you could do it both ways. You could do it as a Saturday race and a Sunday race, so you could have a bit of a mix of both. I don't know how you would lay it all out, but they will never write, in my book, a set of regulations for a Formula One car that uses aerodynamics to give it grip that will mean the teams will not build as fast a car as possible. There's no team out there will compromise the speed of their car just to make it work a little bit better in traffic.